Welcome, everybody. This is Living Between Worlds for January 21st, 2025. This is a monthly series of calls that I've been hosting since early COVID, focused on the challenge of how do we live between worlds with courage and dignity and power. This is the first of our calls for the second quarter of the 21st century, if you can believe that or not. And my goal here today, as with all these calls, is to engender a mood of fortitude and solidarity, to engender that and cultivate it, and hopefully encourage you to do the same in the worlds that you travel in. You know, it's hard to plan these calls right now, particularly because things are moving so fast in the world around us. It's staggering speed and disruption, and and there's messes of so many kinds that we are swirling in. And regardless of which piece of that has your attention, the systematic dismantling of federal services and science, the assaults on NATO and the global order, the wobbling economy, the green hushing and attempted backpedaling on the energy transition in the face of the climate crisis, the terrifying law and disorder of the immigration raids and mass deportations, the covert and now increasingly overt threats to the midterm elections, and the overall assault on the norms on which democracy depends. We're in a mess of messes, as Chauncey Bell would say, and a deeply dangerous one. Fortunately, resistance is rising too. With demonstrations across the country, even in red cities and states, judges and grand juries pushing back on the assaults, religious leaders calling ministers, get this, religious leaders calling on ministers to get their affairs in order because they may have to wade into danger. And most companies, 90%, according to the estimates that I'm seeing, are continuing their sustainability agendas, even if they don't talk about it as much, because the fundamentals of business and physics are still there. It's a strange time, this time between worlds. Prior times when the world changed, it was invisible. It was slow and invisible, and you only knew much later. And communications was slow. It was not a global civilization. Now it's real time, in our faces, moment by moment. Staggering. And, I hear a lot of people, you do too, lots and lots of speculation. And one part of which is the mystery of Trump. Is the guy crazy? Demented? Perhaps so. Crazy like a fox? Perhaps so. The convenient actor on the stage for other people who have got plans in motion, and in fact, a 55-year game plan that we are seeing played out in front of us. Yanis Varoufakis, one of the commentators that I follow actively, and by the way, probably the most deep-faked person on YouTube right now, so be careful on what you pay attention to, talked about designer chaos. He said one of the great mistakes of the Democrats in the United States and of the centrists in Europe is that they've dismissed Trump as a buffoon who has absolutely no strategic vision. He's haphazard. He moves from one disaster to another. He's a fool who somehow managed to defeat them so handsomely. I don't take that view, Varoufakis says. I consider him to be a political adversary that I take very seriously. And you know what? He's put it on paper. Now, he hasn't put it on paper. Bannon has put it on paper. There's I'll give you a link for a remarkable compendium that an anonymous did on Substack, laying out the 55-year game plan that the Republicans have been operating in the United States. So let me give you the link so you can find that. Second here. There you go. And while you're looking at that, I'll just add, I don't have the link, but this spring, Ross Duth out of the New York Times had an interview with Steve Bannon that was remarkable for its candidness and insight. in two ways. One was that Bannon's analysis of the political and economic situation in the United States, the situation of the working class and so forth, was strikingly similar to Bernie Sanders. Uh, but of course, they went in completely different directions with their strategy based on that assessment of the landscape. Um, in this piece that I just posted, uh, the thesis is that what we're seeing now is not random, it's not coincidence. It was specific people making specific moves at specific times over the last 55 years for specific strategic purposes, learning from their progress and mistakes and producing measurable results, uh, among which is an alternate reality that's been established, courts captured, accessibility eliminated, a coup attempted without consequences. Quote, this plan evolved and was refined through trial and error, media incentives, demographic pressure, repeated success without consequences. Each success has taught leaders they could go further. This is why it feels sudden for so many people. They noticed it late, but it's been moving steadily for half a century. We have been outplayed for 55 years. We have not had anything comparable in terms of a coherent strategy. Um, and sorry, I just lost the thought. Yes, so I was talking about Bannon. The other thing that Bannon said that was remarkable was that he and his allies had been cooking this plan, and at some point in 2014 or 2015, Trump showed up as a potential political player, and they said, aha, that's the guy we've been looking for. Let's put him forward as the missing piece, the missing keystone in the plan to give us what we have now. Um, who is we? CB, we is, if Ken Homer were here, he would have busted me on this earlier. We use we in many sloppy ways. I guess in this case, I'm referring to we, the assembled people on this call, and the constellation in this country that we seem to be representatives of. Call it the progressive, inclusive, ecologically oriented um, part of the body politic. Um, one of the things that's mystified me in the course of all this is the mystery of a mystery of acquiescence, about how quiet, um, how until fairly recently, how passive and how accepting, how yielding to the apparent inevitable people have been in the face of this. We see it dramatically in the corporate and sustainability realm that I and many of you pay attention to. The green hushing that's happened in response to the Trump pushback. Although I'll say, from the people that I watch, 90% of major corporations are still pursuing their sustainability agendas. 5% maybe have backslid, 5% are pushing faster. 90% are still doing the work quietly because the fundamentals are still there. But the silence is deafening at other levels. You have half a dozen major national corporations headquartered in Minneapolis. None of them have spoken out about the ICE assaults on Minneapolis. And so, why do companies and business leaders do this? Is it self-interest? Is it fear? Is it, like many of us, not knowing what to do? One of my colleagues is in Davos right now for the World Economic Forum conference, and reported this morning, he said, there are many different Davoses. I tend to exist in the one where real discussions about real issues dominate and where there's a realistic and alarmed view of the current situation. This should in no way be taken as ignoring the other official World Economic Forum, which is, well, different, he said. So, we've talked before about premature surrender and the dismay and sometimes apoplexy we feel in the face of the onslaught. I mean, think about how many hours people have spent. I'm sorry, I'll try to avoid the we. Jumping up and down saying, do you believe how much Trump is lying? Well, this is not true, and this is not true, and this is not true. And all the time that's spent in refuting his lies is time not spent doing other things. Part of the strategy is to have you upset, freaked out, dismayed, disoriented, and reactive rather than focused and strategic and progressive. Um, People have thought, hard to say this with Minneapolis now, but people have thought there's been no resistance. But that depends on where you're looking, um, and where you get your news. The court cases have gone overwhelmingly against the Trump administration. Polls on both approval of him and approval on the issues, solidly and increasingly against. Outrage mounting in the grassroots. Republican representatives for more than a year afraid to meet with their constituents. Pete Buttigieg is doing town hall meetings in Republican districts. Republicans aren't. Um, um, they've reversed a number of moves. It's still an open question about whether the administration is going to defy the courts. We will see. Um, on the sustainability front, I wouldn't call this resistance, but momentum. You've got the energy transition, which at this point is, I would say, is irreversible. Jeremy Flutie from TU Delft last night observed that the first terawatt of solar on the planet took 63 years to install. The second terawatt took 2 years. And the speed is accelerating. Renewables cheaper everywhere on the planet than other energy sources. The EU, on the sustainability front, is unrelenting. The political front is obviously enormously complicated. Just in the last week, China, installing more renewables, batteries, EVs, et cetera, than the rest of the world. I've mentioned before, and most people don't know this, so I'll mention it again. China has, at the level of the Central Committee, a national commitment to an ecological civilization. Now, we can debate what that means and how they're implementing it, but I don't know that any other country in the world has said that, and it's worth digging into. Uh, Jim, I'm trying to get that reference for you. Jeremy Flutie from Delft is my source, and I've asked him for the documented. Um, so what do we do in the face of this? And let me say something else about resistance. I was on a call last week with a group of, I guess I'll say, centrist Republicans who I meet with every week. Most of these are in the financial industry, financial advisors and managers for the most part, but very concerned with social issues. And the dismay and anger in that room was palpable. Um, some of these, I assume, are people who voted for Trump. Many of them are centrist Republicans who didn't. But the outrage was strong. The sense of, I've not heard the word resistance mentioned so often in a conversation, even on the left, much less on the right. So people are looking at, what do you do if this thing comes apart? My interest here, I think your interest here, is not just what do we do if or when it comes apart, but what do we do now to guide the course of things? You know, uh, we've talked before about the difficulty of predicting the future in general, much less in the midst of this kind of chaos. For me, there's a few principles that I keep in mind. It's to accept that we don't know, and release again and again the temptation to think that we know what's going to come. Um, to be clear that about what we care about and what we stand for and what we can offer to each others, and to the world, and the possibilities we can bring forth. Alan Kay famously says the best way to predict the future is to invent it. Uh, and that's the job, that I'm committed to, and that hopefully you are too with me. Um, uh, don't surrender before defeat. The future is not certain. There are no facts about the future. We define it. Not we as like ability to control it, but we participate in that. And so the actions we take, I say, matter, no matter how inevitable things seem. And don't surrender after defeat either. In the long game of history and historic transformation, there are always advances and setbacks, um, always victories and defeats. Read some John Lewis for a reminder of how determination meets adversity and despair. Um, check your baseball stats for a reminder that someone who strikes out 3 times out of 4 is good enough for the major leagues. And somebody who strikes out 2 times out of 3 is a giant in that. So let me stop there. take a pause there, take a breath, and hear from you. What I'd like to do is have, is talk in plenary for the next 15 or 20 minutes, then go into breakouts to allow all of you to have a chance to speak because you may not want to speak in the full room. And then we'll come back and harvest together. So if you'd like to speak, please raise your Zoom hand. That will line you up in queue. I'll take you in order. I'd invite you to be succinct and focused to give room for everybody else to participate. And Jesse, thank you for waiting. Turn your mic on and off you go.
Good for him.
Yeah, I think you're missing what's happening. Um, we have this sort of alien culture is invaded, and the sign of it to me is they don't have any idea what to do, um,
I'm
even
sorry,
less than we do.
who are you referring to? Who's the they?
I'm referring to the union of the reinvented Donald Trump as master of ceremonies and the Christian uh, takeover cult called Christian Nation, which is centered on love of God and hate of your enemies, and expresses it very vehemently all
Yep.
over the place. So these are people who don't know the culture that they're in, is what I'm saying. And that's maybe a more literal way of putting it. Um, but in so doing, then act like aliens all over the place. And I think that's a model that really should be considered because they don't know what to do. Like Trump doesn't know why he's not being praised for everything he does. But he's had this infantile delusion since he was a youth in New York. He's always wanted to have huge credit for things and never understood
He
and
has.
started blaming people.
Yeah, he has.
But
And
anyway, that's a line of evidence that I think really needs to be explored.
he's clearly a very strange human being, and one very damaged by his upbringing. And his cousin or niece or whatever she is, Mary Trump,
Well,
has had a lot to say about the personality of him. But I'm going
well,
to,
it's what
but I'm
hold
gonna,
on. Well, let me just say one more thing.
yeah,
It's the MO of every cult to have created an alien
yeah,
reality
yeah,
central that the cult is organized around. Now, how
true
that
that.
happens is mysterious, but I think that that's what we're dealing with. We're
Well,
not dealing with
I'll say
political motivation.
no, and I'll disagree with you. I'll say that's part of what we're dealing with. What we're dealing with is multifaceted. You say they don't know what to
Sure.
do. But they've managed to take the White House, the Senate, and the Congress and a good chunk of the courts
Uh-huh.
in a small matter of years. They've managed to militarize the cities,
Uh,
break 80 years of world order, potentially disrupt
right.
NATO. There's a lot of stuff they very much know how to do. And I would encourage, I don't want to debate it with you here, Jesse, but I would encourage you to take a read of that article that I published, that I put into the chat, which lays out a very coherent strategy that's been at work. And so I think part of the challenge here is to hold multiple perspectives at the same time. It's one of the things I've observed in my listenings for the past few years that people are very thrown to it's either this or it's that. And they're contradictory, so they can't both be true. But in fact, what if they can both be true? What if five different things can be true at the same time? How do we deal with that? So thank you. Shell, I'll go to you.
Yeah, greetings from the resistance. I just want to anchor us in the knowledge that while it wasn't front page news the way it had been when we were all teenagers and 20 somethings in the Vietnam days, the resistance has been happening right from the get-go. Even before the election, there were people planning, what do we do if he wins and tries a fascist takeover? People like Daniel Hunter, George Lakey, Erica Chenoweth, nonviolent strategists of many years standing.
Mhm.
And I think it was the Thursday or Friday after the election that the first of these massive working families calls with organizing help from like Common Cause and Public Citizen
Mhm.
and Move On and a number of other groups came together.
These are calls with 50,000 people on them.
There were calls with 1 million people if you count the
Really?
YouTube streams. I mean, I didn't know it was possible to do a webinar with that many people.
Mhm.
Um, I think Zoom's limit might be 100,000, but there people figured out years ago how to multi-stream so that only the people in the Zoom room can ask questions if questions are taken, but other people can watch. And of
Yep.
course, there's replays. So it's mine. I've been on probably half a dozen of those calls, and two of them had about 1 million people watching. Um, I want to remind also of the Erica Chenoweth, Maria Stefan dictum that 3.5% of the population withdrawing consent of the governed tends to topple governments. And if you look at the 7 million people who participated in the second No Kings in the fall,
Mhm.
that's and remembering that some people had to work. Some people were afraid to go out of their house because they didn't want to be snatched by ice. Some
Mhm.
people are physically disabled and couldn't leave the house. We're probably not far from that figure. Of course, there needs to be a movement that's really organizing all of them at once so that when the call goes out for a general strike, we know exactly how that's going to play out and who's going to
Mhm.
do what. There's a lot of work to be done. But we have, I think, far more public support now than we did in October or November, whenever it was. Must have been October because I was there and I was gone in November. Um, that what Trump has been doing, along with suppressing liberty, is building a great deal of resistance to the idea that suppressing liberty is what he should be doing. And
Mhm.
then this shenanigans with Greenland is not helping his standing. A lot of people who are much, much more conservative than most of the people on this call are terrified of the destruction of NATO, and that's basically what he's planning to do. They don't like kidnapping foreign government leaders, even if they're nasty.
Mhm.
Um, it's every time he turns around, he makes enemies. And every time he bloviates and names another building for himself, he makes more enemies. Nobody likes him. I mean, nobody. And nobody likes Vance. Now, not being liked is not means you don't have power. He has power. We are, I'm not sure if we're fortunate that he doesn't quite know how to harness it, or if or it could
Be,
be.
be 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 careful, Shell. He is not just he. He is he and
Yeah.
Stephen Miller and a bunch of other folks who are very intentional about what
Yeah.
they're doing.
And this was true in with Bush too. Also, you had people like Rumsfeld and Cheney who knew exactly what they were doing and who had the levers of power in their
Yeah.
hands, if not in name. And we see that here with Miller and with Bannon and with some of these other people. So I'm not.
In contrast to Schumer and Jeffries, Senator Schumer and Representative Jeffries, who say our focus this year is affordability.
They need to
Somehow deaf to
the
what's going on
moment to
in the street.
defund ICE. They need to wake up. I have a letter drafted that I haven't yet sent to both of them that I'm going to copy to my own delegation of three in Congress, one rep and two senators,
Mhm.
and like get off the damn toilet and go do some work here. This is the time. You have the public support. Seize it before it goes away. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Shell. Tori, welcome.
Thank you, Gil. And am I on? Yeah.
I think so.
I think your survey was very good. I think the question really is, will democracy survive? Will it survive gangster capitalism? And this is not my idea. This is, for example, a very good book on that. It was by Robert Kuttner a few years ago called "Can Democracy Survive Global Capitalism?"
The
There's
other
a
one
lot
is
of
on there also. Which one?
there's a lot of
The Goose.
there's a lot uh, of people speaking. You mentioned Yanis Varoufakis. One of my favorites is Heather Cox Richardson,
Mhm.
who I follow almost every day. And she lays it out very well, what's been going on with the conservative movement and the Republican Party since World War II. We know who the architects are, and I have a list right here of many of them. There's a William Buckley, Brent Bazell, Barry Goldwater, William Rehnquist, Lewis Powell, Ronald Reagan, David Stockman, John Roberts, Grover Norquist, Patrick Buchanan, Bill O'Reilly, Leonard Leo, Newt Gingrich, Jude Wanniski, Irving
Yeah.
Kristol, so on and so forth. If you read the history of economic policy of the last since World War II, you'll see what their plan is. We know what their strategy is, and I think one of the problems that the Democratic and progressive side has, we are completely flat-footed. We are flatlining. We have no response because we've been part of it. Bill Clinton got rid of Glass-Steagall. Bill Clinton privatized retirement accounts. Barack Obama bailed out the banks, not the homeowners. We have the whole country, including all of us here, have slid to the right wing. And I think we have to own up, particularly the progressive side has to own up how complicit we were in all of this. So, we've gotten very comfortable in our middle class and wealthier lifestyles, and we can't quite admit that we've been part of this thing. So that's kind of being it in a very blunt way, but that's how I see it.
I'll say, Corey, that some of us are comfortable. A lot of us aren't. And a lot of us are sliding down that economic ladder.
Sure.
That's part of what's here. And the Trump gang has capitalized on that in a way that very little of the Democratic Party has, except for the Bernie Sanders wing, which is, engaged that very explicitly. So, Corey, thank you. Let me go to Alan, and then Alice, and then Rick, then we'll go to breakout rooms.
Very good. I always appreciate the discussions. It seems to me that the question before all of us is, what is the post-Trump program that in some way our consciousness can cohere around, to have a clear view by 2026 election time and the next time when Vance or his worst equivalent is in front of us, that there is really an alternative. Can democracy, such as our own diversity, everyone knows something very well in what we have been doing, could we put our knowledge together to see as our task in the next half a year or so is really what is, from our knowledge, the kind of program that would begin to shift back a democratic reconstruction and abolish the war and abolish slavery. Well, what is the demand actually to shift?
What is the program, and who are the candidates who will step forward and run on that program? Maybe some of them are in this room right now.
I think the candidates will prove themselves by being the ones that help gather the program from the many sources, rather than somebody who has the charisma to stand in front and everybody can think, oh, that's the he or the she that really should lead us. I think the leader will be the person that brings us all together and brings from everyone some contribution to the collective alternative, the democratic reconstruction that we are responsible for putting before the people, because clearly the Democratic Party and the media are not doing that. We are one little thing. So I put out that maybe we should take this as a question that we just return to in all our conversations, looking at our own work. What can we contribute to the collective vision of after Trump, we regain America even better?
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alice, great to see you.
Good to see you. Yeah.
You're going to have to unmute, Alice.
Got it? Yeah.
There you go. Hi.
See you again. It's been a long time.
It has. Nice to see you.
This. I just noticed it today for the first time.
Right.
Agree with a lot of what you're saying. Want to emphasize, though, how long, as you mentioned for civil rights, how long it takes. We're expecting instant results because we're blindsided by how outrageous and appalling Trump's daily soap opera is. But I was very involved in the moratorium. It took years before we got those millions of people out there and really stopped the Vietnam War. That took a long, long time. It was a slow build. In the meantime, there are lots of concrete small things we can do. It's frustrating for me that I'm no longer running an organization, so I haven't the standing or the voice to do as much as I used to. I'm 81 now. But every day I try to do a little something. So today I was down at one of the demonstrations, the walkout demonstration. And right now I'm talking to you from Vero Beach in Florida. This is a heavily Republican place, but
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people turning out for every one of the demonstrations, not as much as when I'm up in north, but down here. And increasingly cars coming by or blowing their horns. Indivisible has been doing a fabulous job
Mm-hmm.
getting us informed and getting people to turn out. So that makes some real difference. It's building slowly. And perhaps most important, it makes the person out there doing it feel a whole lot better, feeling at least there's some little thing we can do. Second thing is, I think the most important thing I've been able to do is for an organization called Wind with Wind, be part of an amicus brief. So I think the most powerful things people are doing today, besides grappling with the big ideas, are the legal challenges.
Mm-hmm.
If any of you are still now affiliated with organizations that might have standing, just watch. There are hundreds of them out there. We're winning some of them, and getting more and more amicus briefs lined up is terrific. The big law firms, many of them are still taking on cases pro bono, even though some are afraid to do so. There's still a lot willing to do it. And where the big firms can't do it anymore, small firms sort of out of Trump's radar are taking it on. And those are something specific. Now, the one we were talking about today is to stop Trump's having halted construction on the Revolution Wind Farm, which was 80% built and approved by 27 different agencies, including the Pentagon. Yet he's calling it a national security threat. And I've been thinking a lot, I'd be interested in your views about why he has been so focused on anti-wind. And I think that it may, in fact, be a really smart, long-term Republican strategy about Greenland. It's been in their sights what they're doing with Greenland. I mean, luckily he backed away from military invention today. But this idea of taking over Greenland, he's been working up to it. And I think he's trying to put Denmark under so much economic stress with two things that we don't think are related. And one is going after Novo Nordisk, and the other is going after Ørsted. These two companies are responsible for a very, very large share of the GDP of Denmark, which strengthens his hand to try to get some economic deal to buy it, crazy as that seems.
On the one hand,
So,
and on the other hand, the 6 largest shipping companies in the world are based in Denmark. So pissing off Denmark has some counter moves built into it. I mean, it's puzzling, Alice, because you've got the ego of the Mad King at one level, and you've got the strategic and geopolitical moves behind it at another level. The massive backpedaling on renewable energy is partly because of a commitment to the fossil fuel industry and countries, although the fossils don't want to go into Venezuela. The attack on renewables, yeah, could be a part of that. His hatred for wind is something visceral and weird.
it is, but it may be more logical than we think. Evil, but logical.
Yeah, and my vote is for a mix of evil and logical and off the rails in combination.
I have one other thing that is a
Yeah.
suggestion for all of us to think about. I don't want to take too much airtime, but that is we always make a big point of talking to some Republicans. Fine, if you don't have any friends who are Republicans, find some and watch the far right media as well. Because on a small percentage of what they're doing, they're actually logical and right. And on the large percentage of things, it's really worth talking to people to at least introduce, to at least introduce a few thoughts, because we're so divided, most of us, by which media we watch, that we don't have any idea what the other side thinks are facts and what the other sides of view are and why.
It's really
That's the
important to
art
do because people are living in very different worlds, get very
Yeah.
different information, are basing their perspectives on very different news analysis and so forth than we might be. I would just say, Allison, you're new to these calls. It's something we've said many times before. Uh, I would encourage people not just to talk to Republicans and folks on the other side, but also listen and
Oh,
listen
absolutely.
deeply, not just for what people's positions are. It's not a matter of debate. It's a matter of like, what do people really care about? Curiosity turns out to be one of the most powerful political weapons. Gee, I didn't, I don't think I think about it a different way than you do. I'm curious why you think about it that way, and open up the possibility of a generative conversation. Because in my experience, both personally and from watching the polls for decades, most people in this country fundamentally have pretty similar cares about the same things, pretty shared values, a sense of fairness that is weird and pervasive, not for everybody, but there's common ground of caring that people can connect over. So that's one of the things that we've talked about before. I'll also mention Listening for Candor, Maria, exactly. Peter Yalkovsky on the call here has a book by that title. I commend you to take a look at it. We'll have Peter as a guest conversant later this year. But Alice, the other thing we did back in July of last year is build a web page of democracy resources. I've just put that in the chat. This was crowdsourced from the people on this call. It's there. Take it, use it, add to it. For people who say, I don't know what to do, there's like 200 different things of what to do. So there's that. Rick and Daniel, I see your hands up, but I'm also concerned about breakout. Would you be willing to hold off until after breakout so we can take people in that? Okay, Rick says yes, and Daniel, I can't see your thumb, so I'm going to take you as a yes. And let me pop us into breakout. Thanks, Daniel. The question for the breakout is, where are you finding and looking for your footing and your effectiveness in these times? And you can think about that at the level of personal care, business strategy, political, financial, what have you. But take some time to talk together about that. I'd ask you to self-manage your time in the breakout groups so that everybody has a chance to talk. As far as format or process, good way to do that might be to each speak for 2 minutes or 3 minutes first, and then discuss together rather than interrupting each other. But work that out yourselves. Just make sure that everybody has a chance to talk, and we'll do that for 20 minutes, and then I'll bring us back into plenary. We'll harvest those discussions and see where we go from there.
What are those two topic words you use?
Say again?
What are the two topic words that you use?
It's there in the chat. Where are you finding and looking for your footing and your effectiveness in these times?
Thank
And
you.
whether that's personal, business, political, financial, you go whichever way you want to go. Welcome back. How was that? What happened? Rick, go ahead.
I'll be very quick so people can debrief on it. I'm just going to put something in the chat here.
Mhm.
It builds on something that Tori was talking about earlier about how progressives are not effective. And I have worked within Indivisible and discovered that it's far more divided than it likes to think it is. It isn't indivisible, it's divided. I won't go down that rabbit hole, just that would be a sidebar conversation. But I'm going to share something in the chat if people are interested about the need for us developing our slow thinking abilities.
Mhm.
We can be more effective in going offense. I've tried to stop playing political whack-a-mole because we're just taking the bait and we just end up being codependent on to the process. So we have to think about how we can go in the offense in a non-violent way so that we can begin to deconstruct that's from something that's been going on for over 55 years, you said earlier. So I'll pass on that.
Rick, thank you for that. And I just observe on Indivisible that Indivisible has a really profound challenge of all these sorts of things. Said it's made up of human beings.
Well, it's not just Indivisible, it's the DNC and the Democratic Party. They just don't know how to go on the offense.
Well,
And they don't have a message. They don't have, if they have got a message, I don't know what it is. You tell me.
in various different ways. So I'm gonna step back for a moment and stay with the queue. Got Daniel Aronson next, and then Craig. Daniel, are you with us? Okay, maybe not. We'll get him when he comes back in. Craig, mic's over to you. Again, let me ask you and everybody, we've got 19 minutes left overall for the call. There's a lot of people here to speak, so please stay succinct and on point, and off we go. Craig Patterson, to you. Need to unmute, though. Microphone button lower left.
Thank you.
And just one second, if others of you would like to speak, and I hope you will, please raise your hand and get into queue and we'll proceed. Thanks. Craig, go ahead.
Yeah, one focus that I think that we might consider as an overreaching focus is how do we create hope and opportunity for our kids and our grandkids?
Mhm.
And how do we, in that educational and creating opportunities process, we will separate them who are becoming a majority of voters because of geometric increase, but focusing on, instead of taking away from their sense of hope and opportunity in the future, recreate it in meaningful ways.
Good challenge. Thank you for raising that. I appreciated also what you said in the breakout about the interplay of hope and hopelessness that I think many of us dance with these days. And choosing hope, not as a prediction, but as a stance, I think is deeply important for us in these times. Mike Dupee, welcome. Jump on
Yeah,
in.
I guess I'll this isn't a conclusion, but I'm really curious to see where it goes, and I'm interested that it didn't come up, but Mark Carney's speech. I just am interested to see where that goes. I think it took a lot of courage for him to do that, to stand up and say this international geopolitical bargain that we've all pretended was true for the last 50 years is bullshit, right? If it was ever even marginally true, it sure isn't now, and we're going to all have to get very multilateral on particular topics and support each other. And I think it's one of those, it's fractal-ish, that you can apply that at that level and every level, all the way down to your local community and in your business relationships and all that. I just throw that out for some consideration, and I'm really curious to see where that goes.
I've seen the headlines on his speech. I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet because I've been in prep for this and other things. But yeah, clearly momentous, and there's some important things being said at Davos.
It's in the Guardian.
Yeah, it's all over YouTube. You can get it's being reposted widely. One thing that, and I haven't seen talked about a lot in connection to the European Union reaction to what Trump is up to, is that Europe holds about 2/3 of U.S. debt. Denmark pension funds are already divesting. You know, there are many tools in the game here. We'll see how they play out. Daniel's come back in. Okay. Mike, thank you. Joanne.
Hi, everybody. Sorry I'm off camera. I'm under the weather. I just wanted to second that, watch that speech. It gives you a lot of hope. And what I really liked about that speech was he and his government have already shown forward motion to achieving the things of the vision he lays out, which I think a theme we're seeing in the world I come from, which is the innovation space, is show, don't tell. I think, words have gotten all jumbled up and they're not very trustworthy anymore. So actions are becoming the new currency. And I put it in the chat. I want to give a shout out to Maria for be the soil for other people to grow and thrive in. She said that during our breakout with me and Heather, and just a beautiful concept of what we can each do to help bring about the change we want to see. So I'll leave it at that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Joanne. Maria, and then Glenn, and then Eloy.
Hi, it's good to see everyone here and to be part of this conversation. I'm just thinking, and as we spoke in our group, how important it is to we're so deeply marinated into ways of thinking and reasoning and understanding ourselves, each other, and the world. And if we don't get sight of this sort of understanding, we'll keep sort of repeating and recreating the same structures and patterns and effects that we're actually trying to combat. So I think there's a great risk that if we don't stop and reflect, we'll be part of sort of recreating the polarization and sort of the same patterns that we are in. And a big part of this is how we understand ourselves and each other. Are we these sort of individual separate bubbles, or are we actually constantly forming and shaping each other? So that sort of, who can I be when I'm with you, like Nora Bateson says, or who can you be when you're with me? And then that means that we are each other's circumstances. We emerge in every moment, in every meeting, and that's how we are each other's soil. But I think there's a risk that we just run ahead thinking we want to change the world, but we're actually just sort of recreating the same patterns and effects.
So how do we not?
How do we not? I think we have to try to work that out together. There's so many ways of being, and we need more diversity and find out new ways of being and understanding ourselves, looking back and looking sideways, I think.
Okay. Maria, thank you. Glenn.
Thank you, and good evening to everyone. I just would like the participants to realize the government in Denmark has advised that all people in the country should have 3 days of food and water in case of military attack. Similarly, in Greenland, it's 5 days. Sweden and Finland have also advised something similar. It is rather unpleasant what's going on, and I can't really describe it to you, so I won't. But to the comments, we speak to each other, we have the joy between the families, we have the joy in our communities, and that's what keeps us going. So we spoke to in our small group. Thank you. Oh, just one last thing.
Yeah.
This thing with Trump reminds me of the difference between weather and climate.
Say more.
Is Trump weather or is it climate?
What?
I'm not really sure. But
Remains,
that's how I'm thinking.
Remains to be seen, Glenn.
Yeah. Well, you don't need to be a weatherman.
Thank you. Eloy. And then Dan Noble and hopefully Daniel Aronson in here somewhere.
Hello, everybody. Great being here. I think what I'm going to say is quite in line with what Maria was referring, is like all this that we are watching Donald Trump because he's the protagonist. But we see this, I see this in my own country, in Portugal, with extreme right wing there. I call it the mini Trump. There is a guy who's running for president now. You see this almost happening in France. You see this in Hungary. Hopefully it will be turned, and so on and so forth. So, but all of this happens because we reach the point where governance no longer satisfies people. There is something fundamentally wrong in the way we organize ourselves. I don't have an answer for that, but I believe that we should think about resistance. We should find ways to get out of this mud where we are now. But at the same time, we should think forward and understand how we're going to run the world after we get out of this. And I believe one of the most important things is get rid of fear, because all our societies, and not just yours or mine, or all our societies are run on fear, and people are afraid of not having enough to survive, not having enough to provide for their kids, and this is pretty much everywhere. So when left governments try to come up with a basic income for everybody, and the right wing comes and say, no, this is just to cultivate useless people, and I don't think so. I think most of the people, they don't want to be useless. They just don't want to be afraid of living. And this is probably the root of all evil, is try to take away the fear And because eventually, with the automation that we can see happening now, a lot of people will lose their work, and a lot of people will need a reason to live and to think about the future. So, and I think
Eloy,
this is our challenge.
What's one thing that you do personally to release fear?
I'm sorry, I didn't, to release fear.
What is one thing that you do to release fear? To not be
Don't
held.
think about it. Believe that tomorrow is going to be a best day, because I can only do it by myself. It's not, the structure around doesn't help. Like now, I'm afraid that I won't have a way to survive the next months because I lost my job. So what can I do? Be positive and think that. And I just joined a political movement that believes that Europe must be together. And I'm working on coherence, understanding that most of the decisions we take fail because we don't depart from a moment of coherence. So I think we need to reach a stage of clarity before we move.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Dan Noble, let's go to you. Dan, can you unmute? There you go.
So, hi, thank you very much. Yeah, we had basically, out of the three of us, we had two different approaches to the question of finding and looking for our footing and effectiveness. One was keep doing the work. Two of us are involved in environmental work for most of our professional life, and Gil, that's what you've been doing as well.
Yep.
And the other was more from the outside of what we refer to kind of generously as our environmental industry, for advocating and preaching and inquiring with friends. One of the challenges that that person brought up with inquiring with friends was that when he talks to some of his MAGA Republican colleagues and family members, that basically, it seems to be that the statistic of 80 to 90% of Republicans are in favor of what Trump's doing. So there's really getting dialogue going from that perspective is really challenging. I think those of us who've been in the environmental movement now, becoming then it was sustainability and now it's regenerative bioregionalism. So we're evolving in our movement. And I feel that is a counterbalance to the extractive capitalism versus regenerative capitalism. So it's been really helpful for me to separate those into those two tiers. But then that means we're still at war with the extractive capitalists who have the majority of the capital and the money. And so what is this kind of war? I took a course on the noosphere recently, the science of the noosphere, and we're evolving into a purely information, non-biological culture. And some of the folks in that culture believe that we should become, silicon-based life forms. So we evolve, but that means going back to basically, why would we want to ignore all the carbon-based life forms? So there's a big challenge here of, do we have, is our politics, including Republicans, a lot of whom are farmers, and they earn their living off of manipulating our biological systems so we can all be fed. We don't want to go where all the information, zealots and investors and geeks want to go, like to Mars and into silicon-based life. So I just, put my daily vote into biology and regeneration. That's how I stay sane. When I turn on the news, I start freaking out. And I watch the news every day. So
I don't start the day with news.
No, I don't do that.
I don't start the day with email. I don't start the day with input from the great beyond. I start the day with a focus on what's key for me, on the well-being of my body, on the creative work that I have to do before any other noise comes in. And I'm with you on the silicon carbon debate. It seems to me that the big difference between AIs and humans, at least at this point, is that AIs don't care, and
Yeah.
they can't.
Well, they don't have a presence. They're not
and
individuals.
Well, and humans care and they can't not care. And it may be that at base, one of the differences there is that we are carbon and water,
Hmm.
and they are silicon and dry. And this is maybe a little out on the edge for folks, but this is the thought that I've been exploring over the last couple of months, is the fundamental of that into what we're seeing unfold. Dan, thank you very much for what you offered. Gene, to you, and that'll be the last word, and then we'll go into wrap up. Welcome, Gene.
I would just mention, I've heard the last speaker mention this word dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of my favorite approaches to everything. David Bohm's version of dialogue.
Well, that's been your work for decades.
For decades, both running local groups and then going online. And I'm about to start online groups using dialogue, and also mentioned the culture wars issue and developmental issues going from egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric to cosmocentric. And we're having wars between people and who have developmentally still operating at egocentric or ethnocentric levels. And for that, my approach is using ontological-based trainings and ontological-based work, being-based work, as someone mentioned, and transformation at that level. So I'll stop there.
Thanks very much for that, Gene. A couple of people mentioned farmers before. There's a very interesting article in Every last week, and I'll put it in the chat in just a second, talking about contagion, about how ideas move, and some things move like viruses, and some things move much faster than that. And what they've observed is that low risk contagion, like sharing cat videos, easy, boom, fast, off it goes. Higher risk contagion, where where you're somehow at stake in the change. And the example they talked about is farmers adopting new practices. And there's extension agents and there's advertisements from the agrochemical companies and so forth, but the farmers don't move. And they don't move until they see their neighbors doing something. The example of something that works, that's tangible, they can test. And so the high risk changes where there's something at risk depend on relationships and depend on rich relationships. And they would say on wide bridges, people who are connected to many other people, maybe in different domains, as many of us here are. And so this is some of how things move. We've talked before about back in the realm of political action and the attack on democracy that we're living inside of. There are many ways to play, and I'll point you again back in the chat to the list of democracy resources that you all built back in July. There are elections, the midterms coming up, which some people say might be the last election we have. So we need to make sure that it's not. And that means not just voting, but get out the vote and donating to candidates and running for office, perhaps yourselves. There's the conversations we have, which has been a lot of our discussion today, with people who we agree with and people that we don't agree with and people who we don't know. There's the slow starting but ramping up progression of lawsuits trying to stop the Trump executive orders. Last I saw, 80 to 90% success rate so far. Will they be adhered to? We don't know, but that's one of the fronts of action. There's bearing witness, as we've been seeing in Minneapolis, to a remarkable degree of people out on the streets at personal risk, trying to slow down the onslaught of what's happening. And then, as a couple of people mentioned before, the withdrawal of consent. There was a digital strike yesterday. I don't know if people participated in that. People around the country went off of all electronic media for an hour. There's discussion of general strike. Gandhi observed a long time ago in India, which, by the way, the India independence struggle was a 50-year struggle. Lots of defeats and successes along the way, and lots of patience and commitment. Gandhi observed that 100,000 British can't control 200 million Indians if they simply withdraw their consent. So the withdrawal of consent may be something for us to be thinking about in the times ahead. There are people talking about general strike. There are people talking about boycotts. Just this week, people talking about letting the CEOs of Target and 3M and United Healthcare and so forth saying, not doing business with you if you guys are going to sit there silent in the face of what's going on in your city. So worth us thinking about what are the ways that we can withdraw consent at levels large and small. And finally, let me just say by way of closing, people say there was even a mention in this conversation today about we need more, less talk and more action. But talk is action, and non-action is action, and indecision is decision. And it's worth thinking about looking at how we think and how we draw the conclusions that we're drawing. Rebecca Solnit wrote last year, there's a curious and curiously popular habit whereby people edit down the subjective truth in the statement, I am afraid we will lose, into the pseudo-objective declaration, we will lose. My best interpretation of this, Solnit says, after seeing it time after time in crisis after crisis, is that it's how people hide from their own vulnerable emotions. It's an interesting journey from real fear to false authority and projection of consequence. But why would you assert as fact and inevitability what you fear? What are you protecting? Maybe the self rather than the cause, but only protecting it from disappointment and uncertainty and risk. Your opponents, she says, would have you believe that it's hopeless, that you have no power. Believing that is the most dangerous form of premature surrender. So with that, I thank you. There's no question that we are living in the midst of a gathering storm. So I'll just remind you verbally, as we often end the calls with, that my friend Brandy Carlisle, who says, you can dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing in the eye. And so may we all find ways to stand in the eye in the storm and hold hands with others and do what we do. Thank you all for being here today. See you next month.
You can dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing in the eye. You can dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing